scheduled, but we're not.
I'm hit. Okay.
Oh, hey, there we go.
It was just thinking about it for a little bit.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah. Calling Chris Anderson in London.
I am in London.
London. Great to see you there.
Crazy. Yeah, I didn't think I was going to make it, but I'm actually home here in London. So, and you are in Chicago. So
I am in Chicago. We are. You expressed a desire for. Just couldn't we have a show where we're both in our homes and our home studios? And here we are on a nice, quiet Sunday afternoon with nothing happening, nothing in the news at all. And it's chaos out there, folks. But, you've come to your happy spot.
That's right. Your happy place.
Welcome, everybody, to History Happy Hour. Thanks to Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours for helping to bring you this show. Check out their rich offering of military history tours at StephenAmbroseTours.com. And Chris, whether people are watching live, watching on replay, or listening on the HHH podcast, we are glad you're here. And today we're going to be talking about the 1st Division, the Big Red One in World War II.
Yes.
But we should take a moment, right, to thank who?
Our august patrons.
Our patrons. Yes. Our Patreon supporters, especially our top shelf supporters, seen here. Look, there's space for 2 more down there at the bottom.
Really
Join us. Become a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/History Happy Hour. And that costs money. I mean, it does. But for free, right now, you could just tell us that you're here and what you're drinking. And Chris, is there anybody watching this show?
We have, actually, people are starting to tune in. We have Dave Borland from Evanston and Dave Picker from hot Philadelphia, is a bit of cool Philadelphia. Lorelei Cam from California.
Doug McCord.
Barry Milgate from Stafford, England. So,
Barry Milgate, yeah. Hi, Barry. Welcome to the show. All sorts of different people. Ken Thompson, Katiki Miller, Jean Templin, and I'll bet Chris Templin is there with her, and Chris Jackson in Iowa. So we have some familiar faces and some not so familiar. But we should get on with the content. So why don't you give me a cue, and we'll just try to get this show off the road. Or on the road, or something.
Off the road.
Woo! We'll take it someplace.
The bar is open.
What's on tap?
On tap this week is we're being joined by Greg Fontenot, and Greg is a retired U.S. Army colonel and is currently a consultant on threat emulation for Army experimentation. I'm going to ask him what the hell that means in just a minute. But more importantly, he is the author of the 1st Infantry Division and the U.S. Army Transformed: Road to Victory in Desert Storm, which was the winner of the 2017 Army Historical Foundation Award for Unit History. He's also the author of Loss and Redemption at St. Vith, the 7th Armored Division in the Battle of the Bulge. But we are here with him this week. I'm very excited to talk about his new book, which you've put up on screen, No Sacrifice Too Great, the 1st Infantry Division in World War II, which has just been awarded top honors in the Army Historical Foundation's 2023 Distinguished Writing Awards for Best Unit History.
Wow.
I know.
Congratulations, welcome, Greg.
Good to be here. As you can tell, I'm a 1st Division groupie. I'm ready to go.
I would hope so. If not, I would have been very confused. So
did you bring a beverage?
I did. I'm drinking, obviously, out of a 1st Division coffee mug, and I'm drinking a Manhattan because the 1st Infantry Division was a New York division just before World War II. It came back from France in 1919. And was stationed in 4 different places in New York, but most of the division was in New York City, where the 16th Infantry adopted Sidewalks of New York as its regimental march, and thus a Manhattan is the right thing to drink. Junction City is right outside of Fort Riley, but the city of Manhattan, Kansas is only about 15 miles away, so Manhattan is appropriate in all kinds of ways.
This guy thinks this one out. This is
fantastic. Good. Chris, did you bring a drink? I
have some very fortified.
Nice. And I noticed it's like still daylight where you are. That's like
oh yeah, it'll be late for a while.
Late nights there. All right, get us started.
Okay. So, all right. So, I don't want to put you on the spot and put words in your mouth, Greg. But at the beginning of the book, You say that General Carterham, who writes the introduction, says the history of the United States Army in World War II is the history of the 1st Infantry Division. What do you think he's driving at when he says that?
I think what he's saying, in fact, I know what he's saying because he and I talked about it, is the 1st Infantry Division is exceptional, but not because of the way it was trained and developed. Because of the National Defense Act of 1920, the United States was blessed with really good legislation in that instance. And it set up the conditions that made it possible for a rapid mobilization of the United States. The Act organized 9 corps areas, Army Corps areas, and 3 field armies. And in each Army Corps area was a regular Army division planned. There was actually only 8 regular Army divisions. Regular Army Division, 2 National Guard divisions, and 3 Army of the United States divisions. All of those structures were in place. However, they weren't manned. So what happened is there was an industrial age mobilization where you went through a series of training events. Even in the 1st Division, a regular Army division, they were under strength. So the 1st Division was the product of a plan. And that plan began in August of 1940 with the passage of the Draft Act. A year later, actually less than a year later, there were 29 divisions in the United States Army in various stages of training. The 1st Division and the regular Army divisions were a little more advanced than the rest. All of these divisions at one time or another provided troops to other divisions to help them get ready and took in new troops so that you didn't have any division that was all green, with one exception, which is covered in Loss and Redemption at Saint-Vith. Right. So it was a systematic way of doing things. The 1st Division was among the best divisions in the Army, according to Dwight Eisenhower. He rated the 3rd Infantry Division as the very best in the European theater. Very disappointed that he thought that since he's from Abilene, Kansas, but that's how it is. Some of the other divisions that he included in that best included the 30th Infantry Division, a National Guard division. And the point of that is by the time the division went to theater, it wasn't a National Guard division or a reserve division. It was an Army division that had been trained adequately. And the exception I mentioned, if we ever get a chance to talk again, is the 106th Infantry Division, which is worth talking about at some point.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So this division spends 443 days in combat, I think, 9 campaigns, 3 assault landings, D-Day being one of them. They suffered 206% casualties. They had quite a war. But in the first sentence of the book, you make the argument that they, despite all this, they thrived by adapting and changing behavior during the war. And so why was it important for you to make that the overriding thesis of this history?
Because if you have those kind of casualties, let's take it, say, Chris is a squad leader. And Chris, like one of the characters that I write about, it makes his 3rd landing in Omaha Beach on the 6th, and he's killed on the 12th. So
sorry,
now
Chris.
we've lost an experienced staff sergeant who landed in North Africa, learned his trade in North Africa and Sicily. So now he has to be replaced. And if a guy fleets up from the squad, then that guy has to be replaced. So now the turbulence is not one guy, it's 2 guys. Routine promotions, wounding, killing, all of those things produce turbulence. And in every instance, someone had to come along and take their place, and they had to learn rapidly. So for a division to succeed and thrive, it had to be what we came to call a learning organization. And how do you learn? You learn by experience, but only if you survive, and only if the lesson that you take out of that experience affects behavior. And some of that is, pretty thoughtful stuff, like we got to have better landing craft. And that came out of one of the things we learned in North Africa. And the extemporized landing ship tanks, which were based on Maracaibo tankers, shallow draft tankers that they used in Lake Maracaibo in Venezuela, were replaced by the purpose-built landing ship tanks. That's a lesson, but it only matters once you fielded that piece of equipment. We learned lots of lessons about how to fight, and that has to be applied, and that means people have to be trained. So the integration of replacements, the adapting to a lesson so that you change behavior, all of those things lead to better performance. Experience taken uncritically, it doesn't matter. Frederick the Great, writing about experience, had a proverb. I call it Frederick's proverb of the mule. He described the military profession as a profession of honor, but only if one took one's experience critically could one really do honor to the profession. Otherwise, you would be like the mule who accompanied Prince Eugen on 13 expeditions. You would, at the end of the day, he said, remain a mule. I believe the better way to say is remained an ass. So experience isn't sufficient. It's experience taken critically that improves operations downfield.
Can I follow up on that, Chris?
Just this once.
Okay, thank you. Because you have a photo, which and I might be getting ahead of things a little bit here, but it's from North Africa, from Tunisia, and it's labeled critiquing. So these are the soldiers. They have already been fighting, and they're now in a session where they're critiquing their performance.
Precisely, and that is what the Army has come to call the after-action review process. In World War II, we used the term battle critique. And in this instance, you're looking at the 16th Infantry, and it says on their Tour, Tunisia, and then there's an arrow pointing to Ernie Pyle with his ubiquitous knit cap. You don't learn without exposing the mistakes you made, and we made plenty of mistakes in North Africa. Kasserine Pass, most people think the 1st Armored Division is the one that learned the most, but in fact, the 1st Infantry Division got battered pretty well in that fight too. In fact, I called the chapter on that the Wehrmacht as tutors. So you have something bad happen, and a way to learn from that is reviewing what happened. That tool got adopted in a big way in the 80s in the U.S. Army at the National Training Center, the Battle Command Training Program, these other training programs. You go through a really horrendous post-operation analysis by experts in the field. I got to be a part of that. I did 3 rotations at the NTC, and I can tell you the after-action process really works, and you can see it in action in World War II, both in the after-action reviews that divisions wrote, but in personal accounts of soldiers. One of the things we mentioned earlier is integration of replacements. In most movies, or many World War II movies, you get the story that no one wants to know the replacement because they're going to get killed in a few days. If you take that approach, you will certainly not prosper. So what you find in the story I found is virtually all of the men who were interviewed, and I used Cornelius Ryan's D-Day surveys, I used combat interviews, I interviewed 9 veterans, I think it's 9 of my own. By the way, don't agree for me to interview you because everyone I interviewed but one is now gone. What you find with those guys is they would talk about how they were received by the unit. And in the case of the 1st Infantry Division, and in fact, most divisions, the things that I've been able to find out is they either had a battle school where they integrated people formally and you went through 4 or 5 days of training, or you got taken by the hand and showed the ropes. So integration of replacements is important because it assures the survival of the rest of the squad, not just the replacement. So the idea that nobody wanted to know the replacements is really myth. Were there some stories like that were true? Of course.
Yeah. So, Greg, we kind of take it for granted. 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, they're very famous. They're well known. We know about them from Normandy. But just to kind of set a baseline here, give us a little bit of their backstory. They'd seen some pretty distinguished service during the First World War. So, they're not starting from scratch. So give us a little bit where they come from and what their background is.
Yeah, the 1st Infantry Division, to this very day, thinks of itself as unique for a number of reasons. It was, to start with, organized in April 1917, and it was literally the first modern U.S. division. Of all the 1st divisions, and there are many of them, 1st Marine Division, 1st Cavalry Division, 1st Armored Division, 1st Infantry Division, but the very first, and it was called just the 1st Division, was in fact the 1st Infantry Division, organized out of 4 regular Army regiments, the 16th, the 18th, the 26th, and the 28th. The 16th stood in the line at Antietam. The 5th Field Artillery, one of the division's artillery battalions, the oldest unit in the Army, is in that battalion. It's D Battery, 1st Battalion, 5th Artillery, which was Hamilton's own. And artillery or not, they took Redoubt Number 10 at Yorktown. So it has a long and serious tradition. In 1940, after they were mobilized, the 18th Infantry Division had an organization day. An organization day is when a soldier graduated from basic training inside the regiment and matriculated into the regiment into a unit. That day, the guy that was the keynote speaker for that matriculation or that organization was a brigadier general retired who was a veteran of the 18th Infantry in the Civil War. So we're talking about unit histories that went back a long way. They were proud of their record at Cantigny in World War I, as well as Soissons, Saint-Mihiel, and other battles. And many of their leaders were graduates of the 1st Division in World War I. Teddy Roosevelt famously commanded a battalion in the 26th Infantry Regiment in World War I. He was very badly wounded. Quick side story, nothing to do with today, but since it is happy hour, we should mention that the division has a division wine, Chateauneuf du Pape, which was the wine that Teddy Roosevelt had brought to him when he was recovering from wounds in the hospital. And so it is to this very day the regimental wine. Chateauneuf du Pape is a very nice wine. And so we have that at the annual division dinner in April of every year. That dinner started, by the way, in 1919, and has continued with some exceptions ever since. So it has a long history. And by the way, the National Guard divisions and the oldest units in the U.S. Army, the oldest unit in the U.S. Army is not the 5th Artillery. It is D Battery 5th Artillery. It's actually a National Guard unit. Yeah. So all of our units have long histories. That was a long answer. I'm sorry.
No, it's not a lot. No, I think it's important that people know kind of where this unit is coming from. Right?
And they took pride in that, and I think they still do. I had hung out in the mess hall this last summer in the 2nd Brigade, and I think they still do. I think the young soldiers still have a sense of what that is. And that's true of the Marines and the Navy. You know, the traditions of the various services are important, and I think they're useful in getting the youngsters on board.
Mm-hmm. One of my friends who was a World War II veteran, John Jarvie, liked to say, said it was a big war and everybody went. And I wonder what you can tell us about the soldiers who make up the 1st Division. So now you know a little bit about their history. You know, what kind of soldiers are these? Is this like the movie where there's an Italian guy and a Jewish guy and a MIT guy, or what is it? What's different? And then, in what ways does that makeup change as they go through the carnage of war?
The core of the 1st Division in 1940 was really New York. There were lots and lots of New Yorkers. As a consequence, there were boatloads of Italians. In fact, when the 1st Division was in Sicily, they were letting Sicilian soldiers to be precise, go home on the weekend to see the family at the conclusion of the campaign. But as the war wore on, of course, draftees came into it, and they were acculturated, if that's the right word, to the 1st Division. In fact, in Sicily, a number of things happened of interest before Sicily. In order to fight the campaign in Sicily, they had to replace some 1,500 casualties from the North African campaign. Almost 3,000 casualties. Some of those were sick, some of those were wounded, some were killed. 1,500 of them came from the 3rd Infantry Division, including Walter Ehlers from a small town in Kansas, Junction City to be precise. He was a 3rd Infantry Division soldier, but he won the Medal of Honor in the 16th Infantry of the 1st Division. So that the New York contingent began to decline in size as replacements from other units came in the case of Walter Ehlers, as well as soldiers who had been drafted or had enlisted after the war had begun. And they joined the division either in North Africa or in Sicily. And so you then had soldiers from all walks of life, so to speak, as in the movies. And the other thing that changed is the physical requirements changed. There's a great book called The Rise of the GI Army, written by Paul Dixon, who gets into that. The original, and also the Army's medical history gets into it. Originally, the Army standards precluded a lot of people from coming in. Of the 1 million drafted in the first draft act, 100,000 were sent home. A lot of the reasons they were sent home was malnutrition. Yes, malnutrition in the United States was a fact in the late 30s. So you had malnutrition as a problem. Then you had the problem of dentistry. You had to have, and I can't remember if I got the number right, it's either 12 or 16 opposing teeth. So you only had to have about half your authorized teeth as long as they were opposing so that you could chew your food. Later on, they put dentures in people's mouth in order to get more people eligible for the Army. You had a height requirement for the Army. I think it was pretty, it was not very tall. But by 1944, people that couldn't meet even those requirements were in. And one of my favorite characters is a man named Albert Momini, who was 5 feet tall. His platoon leader called him Shorty. The platoon leader was 5'1". Momini went into the water on Omaha Beach, and it was way above his head. By the way, there's another guy I write about that was 6'4". It was above his head as well. So Momini got to the dirt, the sand where he was out of the water by bobbing up and down and catching a breath of air as he reached the top, sinking back to the bottom. Now, if you take Momini and you take the M1 Garand rifle, put a bayonet on it, the rifle's taller than Momini was. But he was tall enough to carry a rifle in those days. And remember, too, that, Audie Murphy, the most decorated soldier from that other division, the 3rd Infantry Division, was too small to be in the Navy, too small to be in the Marine Corps, but just the right size to carry a rifle in 15th Infantry Regiment. You gotta love it. So you do have the guys that run the gamut from the semi-literate or illiterate, kid from Louisiana, like my father, who was a submarine sailor, but had been in the Army in the 30s, to the college graduate. So you had a mix, and that changed over time, particularly after the Army Service Training Program was taken down in order to man units in 44, 45. We have a photograph, I think, in the list of an amphibious training event, and there's a guy I drew an arrow to because he is the shortest guy in the line of troops.
It's not this photo, is it?
No, this is a good one too. See old Donald C. Wright in the center, baby-faced soldier that he is. He's a corporal already, and this is November 42. They're landing at Torch. By the end of the war, he was a Staff Sergeant Silver Star winner. But look at those faces. I mean, these are kids, very young people. This is a photo taken by a Royal Navy lieutenant, and this is an amphibious landing craft provided by the Brits because we hadn't yet fielded the Higgins boat, the so-called Higgins boat, the landing craft vehicles and personnel.
So this photo,
an earlier one where they're all wearing the doughboy helmets from World War I.
This one.
Yeah, this one. Take a look at this guy down here. I'd like to know how he got into the Army in those days, because he is obviously shorter than you're supposed to be to get in the Army. But the point is, the idea that the Americans were the best fed, best equipped, best paid, all of that. But this is a country in which malnutrition, pellagra, malaria. My parents both grew up in Southwest Louisiana. Both of them had malaria as a consequence of living down there. This country was a rich country, but not as rich as it is today, and I don't think people realize that.
So I want to go back to this picture here, and this is a landing craft going into action in Algeria in November 1942, and keep in mind that this war and the 1st Division's role in it goes to 1945. So none of these guys have been in combat before. Obviously, as you pointed out, they all look very, very innocent. How does the 1st Division acquit itself in its initial combat experience, and what kind of things do they start to learn from that?
Well, one of the most remarkable things about Torch is, first and foremost, think about the training I mentioned at the beginning, the industrial age mobilization. The 1st Infantry Division trained on the East Coast for amphibious operations alongside the 1st Marine Division and a couple of other units. On the West Coast, the 3rd Infantry Division trained with the Marines out there, so that we had a body of folks trained for amphibious operations. And they learned a lot of things in the training. I didn't put it in the list of photos to show, but for one thing was we started out with everything from rowboats to small barges as landing craft. By the time we went to Omaha Beach, we had purpose-built landing craft. Early in when Guadalcanal went down, in fact, we had it. So you had the whole development of the industrial base to put together purpose-built amphibious craft, but we had a lot of training to get to that point. Where is your boat station? On what vessel or what craft are you going to go? And at what time are you going to go? One of the lessons learned that was not applied in Omaha Beach was land in the dark, because the opposition was going to be high end. In the Pacific, they found it better to land right at daylight. So that got applied in Omaha Beach, which maybe wasn't the right place to do it, because the density of the defenses on Omaha Beach were generally larger than they were greater than they were in the Pacific. That isn't true in every case. I mean, Tarawa, for example, it certainly wasn't true. Guadalcanal going in at sunup was no problem, because there really wasn't much of a defense there. So it varied. But you went ashore at Omaha Beach in the daylight, you were going to get shot at, because they had pretty hefty defenses along Omaha Beach.
So, but Greg, I mean, one of the things that I really found fascinating about the book was that discussion of, kind of that interwar period and where we're starting. And I think most people are aware that we were starting from a pretty low point. But as you stress in the book, and as we go through some of the campaigns, the Army's adapting, it's changing. What I would be curious about at this point would be, is the 1st Division internally leading this change in this evolution, or are they just like everybody else? Is there something special about what the 1st Division is doing I don't
think they were particularly special. I think the fact of the matter is, during the interwar period, a rich body of doctrine was developed, despite the fact that the Army at one point only had 250,000 people in. And I forgot to mention the leadership of the 1st Division in talking about North Africa. Let's go back and
I wanted to talk about
Terry Allen, for example, was one of Marshall's chosen, and he was a cavalry officer. And there's old Terry in the middle with the 2 stars. He was a cavalryman who had taught at the infantry school, and the artillery commander for the 1st Infantry Division at Torch was Clift Andrus. Andrus and Allen were typical of the era. They grew up, they were the sons of soldiers. They honestly grew up together in part at a place called Fort Apache. Yeah, no kidding, Fort Apache. Andrus's dad was a cavalry officer. Allen's dad was an artilleryman. They both decided to go in the military, but they were going to take the opposite branch of their dad. They were kind of ruffians, as teenagers, they got kind of out of line. So the dads got together with the local Apache chieftain and asked him to take these 2 boys on for 2 weeks and show them the ropes of being an Apache. After their 2 weeks, they were happy to do what their parents expected of them, and had learned a great deal at the hands of the Apache. The 3rd leader of the 1st Infantry Division at that time was Teddy Roosevelt. Roosevelt, as you know, was the founder of the Chateauneuf-du-Pape tradition, but had commanded a battalion in World War I, as had Terry Allen, who'd also been badly wounded. Andrus didn't get overseas. So you had very high-speed guys running the division. Allen and Roosevelt were particularly charismatic. I mean, they really were. The troops loved them both, and they loved the 1st Division back in a big way. The other leadership throughout the division was first class. One of my favorite characters is John T. Corley, commissioned from the United States Military Academy in 1938, obviously Irish as all get out, and a New Yorker to boot. As a lieutenant in the division in 1940, in the early 43, he's promoted to major, and he's a battalion commander in the 3rd Battalion of the 26th Infantry, which he commands to the end of the war, winning a Distinguished Service Cross en route. So here's another high-end leader who learns rapidly. Well, his regimental commander when he first got there was Teddy Roosevelt, who'd gone from command of the battalion to commanding the regiment to being the assistant division commander. Dutch Coda, Norman D. Coda, was a 26th Infantry. I think he was 26th Infantry. He was a fairly junior officer in the division. Eventually goes from as a major to being the G3 operations officer, then to be the chief of staff. And then he leaves the division after Sicily to be an assistant division commander. He lands at Utah Beach as the ADC of the 4th Infantry Division, alongside Teddy Roosevelt, who landed as a supernumerary officer. Coda then commanded the 28th Infantry Division until the end of World War II. So you got high-speed leaders. George Taylor's another one. He's the guy who on Omaha Beach said there are only two kinds of people on the beach, the dead and those who are about to die. So you had charismatic leaders who learned over time. And you look at Taylor's papers, George Taylor's papers, he's writing papers on how to fight in the woods, how to fight in a town, how to fight the Germans generally. I mean, these are guys that were thoughtful people, and they'd grown up in that education period in the interwar period that the older guys had. And the Army wrote really effective doctrine. Curiously enough, if you look at the doctrine from 1940, you can hear language that you hear repeated today. Initiative, for example, was prized in Army doctrine, and it is prized today. The ability of a soldier to act on the basis of initiative in the context of a commander's intention. And again, a long answer.
But kind of picking up on this, though, I mean, I don't want to kind of throw a wrench in the works, but I would like some maybe talk about this, because Allen and Roosevelt both, they perform well, but they're relieved. And they're relieved somewhat controversially. So maybe you can talk a bit about that and say, is their relief a good thing for the division, a bad thing for the division? And what comes next?
And well, the answer is whether it was a good or a bad thing is yes and no.
Can I build on that question? I just want to build on Chris's question as we're following the same ideas, because Omar Bradley has this kind of antagonistic relationship with Terry Allen and with the 1st Division. And early in the fighting in Sicily, when there still aren't many troops ashore, and the 1st Division manages to repel a powerful German counterattack, and Bradley says, after the war, he says, only the perverse Big Red One, with its no less perverse commander, was both hard and experienced enough to take that assault in stride. So, I mean, clearly he's got an attitude about them going into this.
Yeah, neither Bradley nor Patton liked the 1st Infantry Division, and the 1st Infantry Division didn't like either of them back. And more about that. Now, Ernie Pyle made Bradley the soldier's general, but he was no more a soldier's general than I am. The record will show I never made brigadier general. So when you think about these guys, you have to understand, and I know you guys do, that egos are involved always. And these guys all had egos. What is true about Terry Allen and Teddy Roosevelt, more Teddy Roosevelt than Terry Allen. Teddy had gotten out of the Army at the end of World War I. He was a very effective governor general in both Puerto Rico and in the Philippines. He was an assemblyman in the New York Assembly, and as I remember, he was a candidate for governor. I don't think he ever won it. But he had a very proud record as an executive in government. He was not particularly well-versed in the administration of a division, which an assistant division commander would kind of be the guy forward, tactically running the fight. The division commander would be the chief administrator. Terry Allen gets criticized about that. I don't think it's entirely justified. So when Bradley says in his memoir that he relieved these guys, that's Bradley's view. If you read the Eisenhower papers, which of course I have to check this, is he sees them as needing to come out of command because they're tired. They've run 2 amphibious operations. They're the only 2 guys at that point who had done that. No one else had led troops ashore 2 amphibious assaults. The 3rd ID is going to get to do that at Salerno, but that hasn't happened yet. So Eisenhower's plan and his recommendation is that they take these guys out, give them a rest. Allen was to go home and come back as a corps commander. He did not. He came back instead as the commanding general of the 104th Infantry Division, the Timberwolves. Teddy Roosevelt was tapped to command. Tapped is not the right word. Bradley recommended that. Listen to this. Bradley recommended to Eisenhower that Roosevelt get the 90th Infantry Division in the summer of 1944. The day that Eisenhower sent the message to Bradley, said, "Yeah, you can do that," was the morning after Teddy Roosevelt had died of a heart attack. And he died of a heart attack on about 11 o'clock in the evening, and the message came in the next morning after sunup. So whether they were relieved for cause is a debate that I don't think is worth having. The fact is, when they were taken out of command, I think in part because that Bradley felt the administration wasn't very good. And where he really got that impression is the second liberation of Iran. So after the boys in the 1st Division take the city of Oran in Algeria, and they go and they fight in Tunisia, they have a rough time at Kasserine Pass, but they spank the Germans at El Ghoutar. And in the movie Patton, where George C. Scott is seeing all these Germans come down this valley, he says, Rommel, you magnificent son of a bitch, I've read your book. It's El Ghoutar. And he isn't fighting that battle. It's the 1st Infantry Division. He happens to be in the hillside overlooking it. And what happened is they come back, they're wearing wool uniforms. They've been in combat for quite a few days. They take a 900-mile truck ride to get back to Oran, and they discover that Oran's been taken over by what was called the base section, the logistics troops. Those guys are all wearing khaki, which is comfortable. The 1st Division's wearing wool uniforms. They're told they can't go in town. You have to have a tie on to be seen in the hospital. One of the 1st Division officers, a guy named George Fink, is sick with malaria, and they won't see him at the hospital because he's not in the right uniform. So what happened was what was called the Second Liberation of Oran, where 1st Division troops would beat the hell out of an MP in khakis or some loggy toad in khakis. Now, if you think that's changed, when we crossed the border berm coming back out of Iraq into Saudi Arabia, we're greeted by the 2nd Corps Support Command guys with brand new desert fatigues and embroidered name tapes. I mean, it's always been that way. The rear area troops, have it a little easier than the forward area troops. And the forward area troops in this case did not appreciate it. So the 1st Division deserved a reputation it had in some cases. However, they could fight. So Patton said, quote, I need these sons of bitches for the fight in Sicily.
So, but Greg, I mean, whether they were relieved for cause or not, and you're right, it's an immaterial argument, but their replacement is a much different sort of personality. So, we wanted to start to lead the story of the divisions talking about Normandy. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Hubner and his background and how he's a little bit of a different sort of commander than Alan
I'd
Arthur.
love to talk about Clarence R. Hubner from a small town here in Kansas, as well as Willard Wyman. And you have photographs of those guys in that scene where they're about to leave Sicily. Hubner was enlisted. He had gone to business school because he couldn't afford to go to college. That's Clarence Hubner. There's another picture in there and somewhere else of Hubner's on the guy in 2 stars. The guy in the middle is JFR Seitz, the commander of the 26th. And the guy on the right is John T. Corley, and they're in Aachen, Germany. Hubner was also an instructor at the infantry school, close friend of George Patton's, World War I combat veteran of the 1st Infantry Division. So he's an alumnus, and known as Coach because he was a marksmanship expert and was a good trainer of marksmen. In fact, he would not hesitate to step into a unit and correct the private, in training and say, here's how you do this, son. He'd get right on the ground with him. Bradley describes him as a flinty disciplinarian. I don't know where he got that. I do know that when Coda left to be an assistant division commander in the 4th Division, the guy that took his place was a man named Stanhope Mason. Stan Mason and Hubner were talking together, and Hubner said, one of us is going to have to be a son of a bitch, and the other of us is going to have to lift them up. And Hubner volunteered to be the son of a bitch, and Stanhope Mason was, in Hubner's words, to save those that could be saved. So he was ready to do what had to be done, and he loved the division, but he wasn't the charismatic character that Alan was, and he was also far more meticulous in that respect than Alan. The other guy, and we'll talk more about Hubner as time goes on, it was Willard Wyman, a remarkable character, a cavalry officer, Mandarin Chinese speaker, who was in China in the interwar period and was given the task of mapping the Gobi Desert, for crying out loud, which he did. And then he also helped lead Stilwell's headquarters when they walked out of Burma on foot. Wyman was leading the way. Wyman doesn't get the kind of he didn't get any press at all out of Omaha Beach, partly because when Ryan wanted to interview him, he told him to read the after-action reviews. So Coda Roosevelt, who didn't get interviewed, obviously, and others, George Taylor, they get the lion's share of response. But the guy that really made things happen on Omaha Beach, aside from George Taylor, the guy that managed the fight was Willard Wyman. And I'll tell you, he was one class act. He went later on to command the 71st Infantry Division. So in the persons of Hubner and Wyman, Andrus stays on. You have three consummate professionals. There wasn't a better artilleryman probably in the artillery than Andrus. He later on commanded the division, and after World War II, he was the guy that ran the artillery school. He was the guy that set the standards for organization and doctrine of artillery. So you have high quality guys, and they understand how to take on the preparation manner. Hubner, by the way, had been in the Allied Forces headquarters staff for Torch, so he knew amphibious operations from the higher echelon, and now was going to get to practice it at the division echelon.
So you've talked a little bit about the officers. Talk about the state of this division as they're preparing to go into Normandy. So they have fought in North Africa and Sicily. They've been, around now for like almost 2 years in action. They've got a lot of tired veterans, but they also have a lot of new draftees who've never been in action at all. The veterans probably wish that they could go home at this point. The draftees are wondering what's going on. What is the state of the division in England in the spring of 44, and what is Hubner doing to ready it for action?
That's a great question, because one of the things you alluded to, which is very important, is these guys, many of them in the 1st Infantry Division said, we've done our bit. We need to be rotated home. Well, there was no rotation scheme for the infantry. There was for the Air Force, but bear in mind, to do that, you had to survive 25 missions, and nobody made that goal till 1943. So if you wanted to get into the 8th Air Force, that was not going to be a solution to getting home alive. So the problem was you had a combination of issues. When the 1st Infantry Division was going to be pulled out of Sicily and sent to the UK to train to go to Omaha Beach, they were cadreed as the 3rd ID had been for them. This time they sent 1,500 plus people to the 3rd Infantry Division to plump them up for Salerno, so that the 3rd ID didn't take a whole bunch of rookies to war. So now you have the veteran group has shrunk by KIA, WIA, and sickness, and you now have some of those veterans sent to the 3rd Infantry Division. So you have a large tranche of replacements coming in. And the stories that they tell about being trained and shown the way in the fall and spring in 1944 is actually quite good. The 1st Division did a really good job with that. They established a battle school where you came in and you were taught everything from the traditions and customs of the division. I don't suppose they all learned about Chateau Neuf de Pape, which could have led to looting later, but they were taught the way of the division and how to do their jobs. And the reports on that are uniformly good. By then, too, the equipment problems that they had suffered getting ready for North Africa and again in Sicily had been solved. For example, the platoon leader of the cannon, one of the cannon platoons in the cannon battery in one of the infantry regiments, didn't get to read the doctrine for cannon artillery until he was helping the 9th Infantry Division learn how to use howitzers in a cannon company or cannon battery. They call it cannon company. But by 1944 in England, that problem had been solved. They also had to re-equip. So you had a combination of integrating replacements, training the replacements to be in squads and platoons, and then training the platoons and companies. And so what you saw was there had to be a focus. And Hubner and Wyman and Andrus focused at the small unit level to begin with, so that you got the integration of replacements inside the company-sized organizations. And in these companies' organizations, they had a fundamental non-doctrinal solution to a problem, which is when you put 31 guys in an LCVP, which is what an LCVP would take, you are 13 short of a platoon. So you had to break the platoon organization to produce boat sections. And in the boat sections, you had so many guys that carried Bangalore torpedoes, other guys who carried satchel charges and so forth. So you generated a new kind of unit. So you're doing two kinds of training simultaneously. How do I train to fight in a platoon in a company on the one hand, and how do I train for the specialized operation of breaking onto the beach? And that varied by unit, of course. So you had all of that coming up. So small unit level up to higher unit level, and then rehearsing landings at Slapton Sands. And everybody, I think, will probably have heard the story of how E-boats got into the middle of that one night and killed 800 sailors and soldiers in a rehearsal of the 4th Infantry Division on Slapton Sands in the spring of '44. But all those things had to happen to make it worthwhile. So the other thing I would add to that is Hubner was a can-do guy that would get down on the ground with the troops. And in fact, at one point, he got in a foxhole, let a tank drive over it, so the troops would know, as they had learned at El Guitar, and they learned again with the Hermann Goering Division on the beachhead at Sicily, you can survive tanks overrunning your position. You get up and shoot them in the back end as they go by. And this, one of the privates sees Hubner do this, and he says to his platoon leader, "Damn, the old man knows his business." Well, yes, he did, and that matters to the youngsters. And bear in mind, these guys, might have been draftees, but they weren't unwilling draftees. They wanted to get through the war, and they believed in the cause. So I think it helped. Wyman was also very much a team builder, and he would go down and show people how to do things, as did Andrews. So what you have is leadership from the top down and effective leadership bottom up, squad leaders that learn their business in 2 landings or leading these squads. So you have largely experienced leadership.
So, Greg, I mean, you've touched on some of this, but I think obviously we can't talk about the whole history of the division in the hour. A lot of people are interested in Omaha Beach and the landings there. There's a reason it's called Bloody Omaha. We have a general sense that it was a bad place to be on the morning of June 6th. But can you talk a little bit more kind of specifically about the 1st Division's experience on the beach that day, what their missions were, what they endured, accomplished? And also I'd like to know, is there something about that division, its preparations, its professionalism, its experience that made them able to survive and endure that day?
Well, part of it had to do with the leadership that was experienced.
Right.
George Taylor, as a regimental commander, he's leading the attack at the 16th Infantry Regiment. Willard Wyman has less experience in Europe or in the Mediterranean, of course, but he had experience in China, Burma, India theater. They all had World War I experience. Taylor did not, but the top leaders did. The thing that made Omaha Beach difficult was the beach is concave. That is, you're attacking to the south. And that's the other thing that gets a little bit confusing about Omaha Beach. I mean, I'm misoriented when I start thinking about that, because north is at the top of the map, right?
Right.
And you're attacking towards the bottom of the map. So you have this concave beach, which meant the Widerstand nest, the resistance nest, which it conveys an idea of 2 or 3 people in a machine gun. We're talking about big concrete emplacements with anti-tank guns, in some cases tank turrets laid into the embrasures or into the fortifications, MG-42 machine guns. And, we're talking about a very impressive defensive system. And then you had all the beach obstacles. And if you look at the overhead imagery and oblique imagery of the beaches, the tetrahedrons and the teller mines on the end of poles, it's a very impressive defensive system. And I know all of you have been there. But if you look at that really famous picture of E Company of the 116th Infantry, which I included in the list, going ashore, you can see the highlands. So if you look, and here's the beach, look how far they are away from the dirt. Then you get to the dirt, despite all the haze and everything, you can see the high ground beyond it. E Company's landing almost opposite of Colville-sur-Mer. So you're looking at that. You can see all the obstacles out there. You can see these guys wading in through deep water. Then they get across all this. They come to the shale, not the shale. I can't remember what you call it right now. 90 millimeter in diameter gravel, which is along the shoreline. You can barely walk across it and they ought to do that. Then you get to the seawall. Then you have to get over the seawall, and you have a couple hundred more yards to get to the high ground. So we're talking a devastating place that you have to cross. It's a long way to go. You're soaking wet, you're under fire, and you're carrying a hell of a load. I mean, it's just not going to be easy, even if no one is shooting at you. Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there's a current flowing from west to east. And if you look at what happened on that, 2 regiments land under the control of the 1st Division. The 16th Infantry Regiment on the left or east, the 116th Infantry Regiment of the 29th Infantry Division on the right or west. And one of the boat sections, one of the LCVPs from the 116th winds up, and it was supposed to land in the center of the 116th sector. They wind up all the way on the left of the 16th Infantry Regiment sector. So you have this neat plan. I think it was 26 waves. And the first wave is shot to hell. And oh, by the way, they don't land where they're supposed to. You have some boat sections that wind up landing elsewhere. They start the war from wherever they are. Then you have a couple of boat sections, one of them led by a company commander, says, okay, I'm going to go where I'm supposed to. So he convinces the teenage coxswain that they're going to sail parallel to the beach to get to the right place under fire the whole time. So it is really tough. And there's only 800 guys in the first wave, 800 against about twice that many defenders. Those are not good odds, let alone when you're soaking wet and half drowned getting ashore. And oh, by the way, you've been throwing up for the past 5 hours. We put those LCVPs into the water about 2 hours out in terms of the travel time it took them. I have a photograph of DUKW, a 2.5-ton amphibious truck going passing the USS Texas. There it is. Now look at that. These guys have got 2 hours to go to get to the beach because the Texas was 10 miles offshore. And these things on a good day in calm water can go about maybe 6 knots, a little less than that. So it's probably 2 hours to the beach. Now, how would you like to make that ride? And oh, by the way, look at the LCVP in the background, and it's just now crossing the Texas, heading back to take another load. We're talking about a long, difficult way. So how do we win this fight? Because people like John Spaulding of the 16th Infantry, a lieutenant, Joe Dawson, another lieutenant, and various lieutenants out of the 116th Infantry Regiment, by God, we're going to get it done. And so you have Spaulding taking a boat section, getting it all the way up to Colville, under fire, fighting back, taking down pillboxes along the way. Small units won this fight, managed also with leadership and aplomb by people like George Taylor at the top, George Fink, a company commander, and Willard Wyman making sure that the right stuff got. He finally at one point told Hubner, don't send me any more tanks, don't send me any more vehicles, I got to have infantry. So you have people managing the fight from the top and young soldiers from the bottom figuring it out. And then they coalesce with other groups of people, sometimes extemporaneously, to act on the basis of initiative, understanding what the job is, which is to get the hell off the beach.
I remember a story, Spaulding's sergeant, whose name was Strezick, I think, is coming down, Spaulding being one of the first people up the hill along with Joe Dawson, and Strezick is coming down to report to another officer, and as he's about to step on the beach, he steps on a mine which doesn't go off, and the officer said to him, well, why did you step on that mine, Strezick? You obviously saw it. And Strezick said, well, it didn't go off when I stepped on it on the way up, so I figured it wouldn't go off this time either. So that was
when you read the combat interviews of Strezick and Spaulding and others, I mean, these stories are abound. The Bedford Boys story. I mean, here are these guys, the first guys deployed to England is the 29th, and they trained from 42 to 44 for this fight. And A Company 116th, the company commander's boat section takes a beating on the way in, and by the end of that morning, the company commander's dead, and about half the company of A Company 116th. The Bedford Boys is a heck of a story. And that happened that happened to a lot of boat sections, and yet the survivors got the job done.
Yeah, we saw.
And what it reminds me of is Charles B. McDonnell in one of the official histories talks about, and he says it's a great honor to write about American soldiers. In fact, I think I'm going to just read it to you because I'm working with this book. He says, it is always an enriching experience to write about the American soldier in adversity, no less than in glittering triumph. My God, what a statement. The admiration that I have for those guys, and McDonnell, by the way, was a combat veteran, as you both know. You know, these guys were incredible, and they're doing it. And then down the beach at Gold, Sword, and Juneau, the British and Commonwealth troops are doing it. And on the right at Utah Beach, the 4th Division is doing it. Now, it's easy to get ashore at Utah Beach, but you can't go anywhere from Utah Beach until the 101st and others clear of the causeway. So this is an incredible effort. It's no wonder everybody, wants to know about Omaha Beach. But one of the things to remember about Omaha Beach is the job isn't to get ashore. That's a task. The landing is a task. The mission is build the lodgment. And then once the lodgment is built, penetrate the defenses in order to follow Army doctrine, which is once you penetrate, you envelop. And envelopment leads to pursuit. And that's what we do at the end of July of 1944 with Operation Cobra.
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of war we haven't covered yet. The race across France, the 1st Division's battle for Aachen, the Hurtgen Forest, the Battle of the Bulge, and then eventually their drive. You know, we like to think the war is over when we cross the Rhine, but a month later, the 1st Division's driving into the Harz Mountains in Czechoslovakia and having all sorts of stuff going on there. So you can check it out by looking at the book by Gregory Fontenot, No Sacrifice Too Great, the 1st Infantry Division in World War II. And Greg, thank you so much for coming on today and for sharing not only your knowledge of the 1st Division, but kind of also your own combat knowledge, which kind of helps you interpret it in a very useful way.
And also other cocktails that we weren't aware of.
Yes.
That's what I'm talking about. I hope you'll have me back, maybe to talk about my other favorite unit, the 7th Armored Division.
I would love to do that.
Get me at the drop of a hat, and I'll bring the hat if you want
to. Okay. Are there cocktails to go with the 7th Armored Division?
Oh, I can think of one.
Okay.
Okay.
It takes place in Belgium. They drink beer and other things there.
They do, and some of the best beers in the world are Belgian beers.
Thank you so much for having me on, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. We'll say goodbye, but hang on, and we'll say goodbye to you off the air. So thank you so much for joining us. That's a very fascinating story.
Absolutely.
Story of the 1st Armored
And
Division.
as always, we ran out of time before I ran out of questions. So read the book, guys.
Well, not as always, because sometimes we run out of questions first, and that's always awkward.
Yeah,
but not this time.
Not this time. So read the book.
Bit.
There's a lot there to digest.
So next week, Chris.
Yes. You're gonna be
I'm going to Scotland tomorrow.
I know. Look at that. On what? Vacation, right?
Vacation.
What's that all about?
It's an amazing concept.
Yeah, I'll tell you what.
And I can't do a show
Wife for Riley.
traveling.
Wife for Riley. You're gonna buy a kilt though. You said you're gonna buy a kilt. Or get a picture of yourself in a kilt.
I said that after 8 or 9 days in Scotland, I might be mentally delirious enough. I might be drinking in so much of the heather or something that I end up
drinking in heather. That's an interesting visual.
Lassie, go anyway.
Stop.
Okay, yeah. I might come home with bagpipes. I just don't know. It's hard to say. But next week we've done 7 episodes live in a row. My God, we need a break. So next week we're gonna have an encore episode, and we are going back to the favorite topic that we agree about everything regarding.
Absolutely not.
The American Revolution.
War of Independence.
Thank you so much. So we're going to be playing our show about John Hancock, where we interviewed Brooke Barbier. So her book is called King Hancock, The Radical Influence of a Moderate founding fathers. So it's a good book, good interview, and we'll be happy to bring that back to you. And then we'll be back again live for much of the rest of the summer. We do have a few encore episodes, but we have many
No,
live
we got a lot of
episodes
great stuff coming up. I got to
coming
say.
up, and a lot of anniversary books and a lot of books coming out that are new books. So it should be pretty exciting. Chris, I should just say to people that I hope you subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, shout at us on Twitter, listen to our podcast, back us on Patreon, and browse historyhappyhour.com.
Thanks, everybody. Be safe.